Yeah.
सिमरन को कहना
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the post-budget analysis of the Indian-American Chamber of Commerce. As everyone knows, our theme for today's discussion is moving towards a futuristic India. We have an esteemed panel of experts to share their valuable insights on the Indian growth story and the expectation from various stakeholders. Well, the interim budget was along the expected lines, with no major announcements and a revalidation of the focus on infrastructure, Make in India, and people welfare. In line with this, the budget speech focused on the four major pillars for growth and inclusive development. First one is the farmers, women, youth, and the poor. Though a more detailed budget is expected in July after the appointment of new government in center. However, till then, this financially prudent yet optimistic interim budget sets a promising path for the country's sustainable growth and paints an optimistic picture of achieving the goal of Viksit Bharat by 2047. Now, I would like to introduce Arun Karna, Regional President, North India Council at the Indian-American Chamber of Commerce, a highly experienced technology business leader with more than 34 years of experience in the telecom and IT industry. Arun is currently the MD and CEO of AT&T Global Network Service India Private Limited. He is also a member of the B20 Task Force on Technology, Innovation, Research and Development. Additionally, he is a core member of the CI Delhi State Tech Panel. Arun, request you to please share your thoughts on the interim budget and the overall direction the Indian economy is expected to take over the next 5 to 10 years. Over to you, Arun.
Thanks so much, Akhil, for the warm introduction. Good afternoon, esteemed participants and distinguished speakers. My apologies, I'm taking this from a public place, so you might hear some background noise. But on behalf of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, it gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to this insightful session on post-budget analysis, moving towards a futuristic India. We are honored to have as a chief guest, Mr. Raman Chopra, IRS, Joint Secretary, Tax Policy and Legislation, CBDT, Department of Revenue, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Our esteemed moderator, as you heard, is Mr. Akhil Chandna. He is the chairman of our BFSI committee at IACC and IC, and also partner at Grant Thornton Bharat LLP. He is joined by such luminaries from the finance and tax domain, such as Mr. Aseem Chawla, Executive Council member ICC and partner AAC Legal Solicitors and Advocates, Mr. Riaz Thingana, partner Grant Thornton Bharat, Ms. Radhika Rao, Executive Director and Senior Economist at DBS Bank, and Mr. Rahul Agarwal, who's Senior Economist at ICRA. Akhil, as to your question, I would say India has become we all know that India has become the fastest growing economy amongst the G20 countries and is currently the 5th largest economy globally. And despite a challenging external environment, the Indian economy has shown a lot of resilience due to strong macroeconomic fundamentals, and India is expected to play an increasingly important role as a major growth engine globally. The decade leading up to the interim budget 2024 highlights the aspiration of achieving the goal of a Viksit Bharat by 2047. That is, a Bharat as a developed economy and a global powerhouse. The budget focused on boosting confidence on investments by emphasizing the macroeconomic stability provided over the last 10 years, strengthening agriculture, infrastructure development, boosting employment by means of training, skilling, and reskilling, empowering women, and research and innovation. The FDI inflow during the period 2014 to 2023 at US dollars 596 billion is twice the flow during the preceding 10-year period of 2005 to 2014, marking a golden era. So the government has acknowledged it, it's given a nod to it. They are intent on promoting sustained foreign investment, continued and successful negotiations on bilateral investment treaties with foreign partners that will be ensured. And it will be interesting to see how this all pans out. So against a very dynamic geopolitical environment, India is continuing its sustained endeavors towards becoming a US dollar 7 trillion economy by 2030 and a developed country by 2047. Now, although it was only an interim budget and the tax regime was largely left untouched, but still the budget covered a wide swath of subjects. So capex has been increased. There was huge talk of rooftop solarization leading to free electricity. There was a lot of talk of charging infrastructure for electric vehicles, promotion of post-harvest activities, expansion of nano DAP application, housing for middle class, expansion of medical colleges, vaccination for girls. A long list, it goes on. And there was a lot of focus, I think, on promotion of overall investment, foreign investment. And yes, there is, of course, an income tax remission scheme as well. And, the Prime Minister said it, that it will empower all 4 pillars of Viksit Bharat: the Yuva, the Garib, the Mahila, and the Kisan. Now, whether that would really happen remains to be seen. And I think we have got far more expert and experienced people on the panel here who can comment on this. So with that, thank you, Akhil, and I hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Mr. Khanna. I think the fantastic positive outlook you've given. I think you've touched upon everything which was there in the speech, reiterating the confidence and taking the economy to 7 trillion economy by 2030, which is the vision. And I think let's hear from another esteemed panelist we have today with us. Though you've given a brief introduction of everyone, but I just want to go to Riaz Singh now, who has more than 3 decades of experience in tax and regulatory advisory services, be it domestic, international tax matters. He leads professional standards for non-audit practice of the firm, Grant Thornton, and also leads the National Tax Office. He's advised many large clients on corporate structures in the auto, manufacturing, real estate, infrastructure, travel, banking, and reinsurance sectors, whatever you name. So Riaz, you've seen the government has stayed within the electoral code of conduct and accordingly not made any significant announcements. From stability in direct and indirect tax rates to ease of compliance, we have certainly come a long way in the last 10 years. Would like to understand your thoughts on the journey covered so far and key tax policy changes required to propel India towards realizing our goals as said by Mr. Khanna for becoming a 7 trillion economy by 2030. I'd like to hear from you, Riaz.
Sure. First of all, thank you, Akhil, for that very generous introduction. I'll start by commenting that you are absolutely right in observing that the finance minister's refrain from making any major or even populous announcements in the interim budget is absolutely in consonance with best practices and democratic values. So I think that's a very big positive. But to answer your question, that over the years, there have been many steps on tax policy which have gradually and significantly supplemented the ease of doing business. The most important one, in my view, is the resolve to keep away from retrospective amendments. That announcement alone adds a lot of trust in the country as a business destination. We need to follow that really strongly, because I think that is a very, very important measure that has added a lot of trust. Over the years, we've had a lot of changes. You've had, firstly, starting right from the introduction of GST to faceless assessments, faceless appeals, pre-filled tax forms, and similar other policy changes which have overall added to the taxpayers' confidence. But having said that, there is a lot more ground to cover. Changing behaviors at the ground level is a serious obstacle. We can change policies, but people's behaviors have to change. Of course, this will take time. The journey has to begin. The journey has begun, but this is something that we really need to work on. The second one is the issue of dispute resolution. We have an unending list of pending tax disputes in our courts. Some actions have already been taken by the government to reduce the number of pending cases. A case in point being the announcement yesterday of waiving tax demands up to 25,000 for cases up to 2009, 2010, and I think 10,000 for the period thereafter up to 2014, 2015. This is, of course, in addition to various other steps, reducing the number of litigations, tax litigations in the country. But there is a case to be made for introducing alternate dispute mechanisms. This, I think, has been a long-standing demand, and I think this will address at least many interpretational issues and reduce the burden on our courts. One other issue is that of those various incentive clauses that we've had. Generally, they are for a limited period of time, and rightly so. But the trend is that these incentives are extended on a year-to-year basis. So even in this budget, some of the sunset clauses for startups, for units set up in IFSC, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds have been actually extended by 1 year up to 31st March 2025. Now, this 1 year is not enough. There's been a long-standing demand by the taxpayers that such extensions should be for longer periods, say 5 years, which would lead to more stability and assist businesses in planning their investments. And this has to be addressed. While I'm talking about this just on a tangential issue, I also noticed that the lower tax rate for 15% for manufacturing companies has not been extended. To my mind, it seems to be a slip, and we may have a correction because the continued focus that we have on Make in India, it seems to be a slip. I hope I'm right. Now, you spoke about the $7 trillion US dollar mark for our economy. I think there we are well on that path. I think the rate of growth, the sustained rate of growth, and some of the steps that have been taken in terms of planned expenditure towards infrastructure, agriculture, all the social infrastructure, the key pillars that we need to concentrate on. I don't see a challenge in us reaching the $7 trillion mark unless something drastically wrong happens. But all these things so far have already provided the platform to take the economy forward on its continued path. I think that 7% and above growth on a year-to-year basis seems extremely sustainable at this stage. So those are my initial thoughts, Akhil. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Yaz. I think very insightful, and hopefully our finance minister take note of whatever wish list you've just mentioned, and I think July we'll see the full budget, and those wish list gets fulfilled because it gives a lot of confidence to the taxpayers and can promote ease of doing business in India. Before we go to the to further, I have one more important question to ask. You've seen that government has taken a significant step, to decriminalize minor economic offences under the Companies Act. However, this has not been replicated with the income tax laws, where prosecution can be initiated even for a minor TDS, offences. You've seen that. Do you think this can be something for main budget wish list as well, in addition to 5, 6 items which you just mentioned?
No, absolutely. So I think you really hit upon a very, very important thing. To my mind, firstly, tax offenses are mostly, if not financially, not entirely financial offenses, right? To take care of any wrongdoing there in non-compliance, defaults, we already have heavy penalty clauses. So in most cases, where is the need for prosecution? Let's face it that over the years we have seen that tax compliance only increases when there is more trust, more stability, more transparency. And this fear of prosecution is so heavy that, small offenses, as you rightly mentioned, on TDS, other offenses which could be mainly demands being raised only because of certain interpretations and justified interpretations that have been taken by taxpayers. If they're proved wrong, well, interest, penalty, all that is there. But today we have prosecution notices being issued randomly for some of the smallest defaults. In most cases, there is no case for prosecution, and prosecution doesn't get initiated finally. But in the interim period, there's a lot of harassment. This can be an immense problem. So, on the other hand, I see the need that if to protect the interests of the revenue, if prosecution proceedings need to be there for at least cases where there is a genuine financial fraud, in those cases, at least what can be done is that if prosecution clauses are there should be strict safeguards. These safeguards should ensure that officers cannot randomly issue prosecution notices, cannot initiate proceedings unless a whole internal process is taken and a case is made out where there's a prima facie evidence of willful wrongdoing. So I think this is something the Income Tax Act, we need to borrow from the Companies Act initiative, and we need to look at this prosecution element rather urgently.
Thanks, Ayaz, for giving your inputs and sharing your thoughts. I like the trust, transparency, and stability. I think these are the three things which you have been reiterating again and again. So thanks to you for your time and for your inputs. Let me now move to another esteemed panelist we have for today, Mr. Rahul Agarwal. He's a senior economist at ICRA. So Rahul is a part of the economy and state finances team at the ICRA Limited. His focus areas include macroeconomic analysis, forecasting, and policy assessment. So Rahul's experience spans across the corporate, institutional broking, and information service sectors. Thanks, Rahul, for giving your time and availability for today. Let me come to you, with a question that how do you see India's growth story panning out in the medium term?
Hi, thanks, Akhil. Good afternoon to everyone. So, in terms of the medium-term outlook, our own estimation is that India's GDP growth potential is at about 6.5% in terms of real growth. Now, this is a little bit of a disappointment to people that are expecting a growth of between 7 and 8%. But But we have a couple of reasons behind why we expect growth to pan at about 6.5% over the next 5 to 6 years. The most important reason is on account of exports. We believe that India's growth is likely to be constrained by a weak demand for exports. So if you look at any forecast of global growth, they are closer to about 3 to 3.1% over the next 4 to 5 years, which is significantly lower than the kind of growth that has been seen in the 2000s or in the decade between 2010 to 2020. So that is something that is likely to weigh in on export growth. And in fact, if we go back to you know uh, the period between 2004 to 2008, during which India had seen the economy grow by 7.9 to 8%. Exports in real terms were growing by about 15 to 20% per annum. So that is something that we believe will not be feasible going ahead. So that is something that is likely to constrain India's real GDP growth. The second thing is, I think, something that pertains to the budget. So this time around, the government has, cut back on the fiscal deficit to about 5.1% of GDP for FY25, and it has reiterated its commitment to, continue on the path of fiscal consolidation. Now, if you look at the capex numbers, they account for almost about 3.4% of GDP, which means that containing the fiscal deficit closer to 4.5% and thereafter to lower than 4.5% would eventually imply either that we need to compress the revenue deficit quite sharply or limit growth in capex. In fact, this is something that is seen in the current budget also, wherein growth is at around 16 to 17% versus about between 25 to 30% in capex over the last 3 to 4 years. Now, in terms of the positives, we are expecting a pickup in the private capex cycle once some uncertainty on account of the elections is behind us. But at the same time, we believe that this pickup is likely to be measured and non-exuberant, unlike in the past, particularly in 2004 to 8, when we had seen quite a bit of exuberance in project announcements. So all the necessary conditions for a pickup of the private capex cycle are in place. So, for example, capacity utilization levels are elevated, order books are looking good, balance sheets are cleaner, and the stock of new project announcements is also very high. And in fact, in the last 2 years, the listed corporate players have made an adequate quantum of profit. So this is something that typically, pushes forward private capex. But in the absence of high export growth, capex announcements and actual execution is likely to be determined by the kind of resilience that we see in domestic consumption. Now, what does this mean for policy rates? Now, basically, we believe that 6.5% potential growth is not consistent with a CPI inflation target of 4%, which the RBI has been focusing on extensively over the last 2-3 policy meetings. So we believe that the inflation, CPI inflation, would likely average between 4.5 to 5%, depending on where we are in the growth cycle. And this further implies that sub 6% policy rates are not possible on a sustained basis, given that we are looking at real interest rates of between 1.5 to 2%. Now, one of the key positives that we also see going forward on account of a weak global growth, so I highlighted that export growth is likely to be constrained because of the weak global growth. But the upside is that we possibly wouldn't see any commodity super cycles in the near term because of tepid global growth. So commodity prices would largely be favorable, and supply shocks would be the key determinants of commodity prices to that extent. So given that India is such a large importer of commodities, this could be one of the key positives.
Thanks, Rahul. I think you've given a very holistic overview, and before we move to the next speaker, just can we say that government continue on the path of further fiscal consolidation while continuing to push growth through the budget in the medium term? This is what we were trying to say and make an interpretation.
Yes. So, as I highlighted, it will become increasingly more challenging for the government to continue on the path of fiscal consolidation. So currently, I mean, the fiscal deficit, in fact, the fiscal deficit numbers for FY25 also came as a surprise to us at 5.1%. We were slightly higher than that. But pushing capex continuously, I mean, growing at double-digit rates would become very difficult if we were to move closer to the 3% mark over the medium term. So fiscal consolidation will have to be a lot slower beyond FY26 in order to continue growth in capex. Now, the upside could be that if we see a robust growth on maybe the revenue side in terms of tax revenues, that could change the dynamics there. But broadly speaking, it will become harder and harder for the government to push growth by the way of higher capex if it moves beyond the 4.5% mark, because already capex as a percent of GDP is 3.4%. So sustaining that number would be very difficult.
Yeah. So quickly, before we move further, any wish list, like Riaz given his wish list and he's expecting in July we can see anything, for the new government, whosoever will get appointed, in the center, any quick things from your side?
See, since I'm from a rating agency, I cannot engage in advisory. But I think one of the key things that most economists look at in a greater bit of detail is the fiscal math. So I think as long as the fiscal math is well put together, we are quite happy with the budget. I think one of the things that we would particularly look forward to is what is the fiscal deficit target and what does it mean for market borrowing. So in fact, one of the key positives of the budget math currently that we see is that the government has budgeted for lower gross and net market borrowings. Now this is very important because it could lead to a lowering of market borrowing costs in the economy. So in fact, there is another, so basically this implies that the supply of G-Secs would be lower. And at the same time, we have the bond index inclusion also starting from June, which also means that there could be a higher demand for G-Sec. So this demand supply dynamic is looking quite favorable, which could lead to, a dip in G-Sec yields. In fact, this is something that we've already seen after the budget announcement. The yield is almost down by about 10 to 12 basis points. So that is something that we expect to see continuing, which is favorable for borrowers.
Thanks, Rahul. I think in interest of the time, let's move to another senior economist we have today, Radhika Rao. She comes with an experience of 15 years in the field of microeconomics and financial markets research. She extensively covers the Indian economy and markets alongside selected Asian countries and maintains a key interest in broader Asia and global developments to provide a holistic view to internal and external stakeholders. Thanks, ma'am, for taking the time out. My first question, I have 2-3 questions for you, but my first question to you, our finance minister mentioned that the digital public infrastructure is one of the major elements for people-centric inclusive development. What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you so much, Akhil, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the questions, and I think Rahul has put up the macroeconomic backdrop very effectively. So to answer your question, certainly I think India has assumed quite a prominent role in the infrastructure piece, and I think it used to be called the India stack earlier, and now it's been renamed as the India digital public infrastructure. I think this journey is a long one, and I think if you were to take even some of the milestones, Aadhaar is one of the digital identity initiatives that was taken back in even before 2010. Later, we had more in the space of payments under UPI. Obviously, it's now grown to be one of the biggest and the most transactions in the world. And we also, I famously remember the finance minister also talking about JAM, so, that's JAM, which is the Jan Dhan Yojana, Aadhaar and mobile number being brought together to strengthen the backdrop of this infrastructure, digital infrastructure trinity. And I think the benefits have been multifold, right? I think what digital infra essentially does is where physical infrastructure is still catching up. It basically bridges that gap in a much faster way. And you've seen that very prominently in the space of subsidies in particular. You've seen that direct benefit transfers, which began as pilots and thereafter has been made mainstream. It has really helped plug leakages by making the whole value chain or whole chain or transaction cashless. And it's also helped India achieve almost 70-80% financial inclusions. And if you remember what the finance minister said yesterday, she did speak about DPI being the new factor of production. Typically in economics, we talk about labor and capital and whatever is residue is called the TFP. But interestingly, she's including the DPI as a factor of production in itself, which essentially means that it's going to be, the better we get at it, it's going to bring in a lot more efficiency to the growth dynamic as well. And in terms of dollar and cents, I think she did mention about 29 lakh crores of benefits being passed on to beneficiaries in the last 5 years due to this medium. And looking forward, and how can India, how will we be able to make this even bigger? And I think the emphasis of the budget was very much on making this whole initiative people-centric. End of the day, like I mentioned earlier, wherever physical infrastructure falls short, the final mile fulfillment can be through these digital channels. What it does is provide citizens services at scale and at lower costs. Again, very important when we have different tiers of incomes in the population. The interoperability of this infrastructure piece also allows a lot of third-party solutions to be built on the existing infrastructure. And it basically does, of course, foster a lot more innovation. And again, to draw in another example, which is a very event-based solution, was what we did in COVID, right? We said in the managing COVID-19 vaccination program was one of those which readily built up on what was already there and helped us reach the vaccination drive to millions, literally billions in most cases. And another example I can come up with is FASTag. Right? FASTag, you'd seen a cashless toll payment system for vehicles, and this has made certainly the highways more investable and I think faster growing as well. So it helps to not only take the payment, but also the transport data can be captured. And I think finally on this, I think this is essentially the whole system being based on open source, right? So basically anybody can inspect, anybody can modify, they can enhance this whole data piece. And that plays into many of the very thriving startup community that we have, who have been coming up with solutions with the real economy problems, right? It's not just a solution to a problem that they envisage, but something that they feel and witness around them. And I think so that's where we can be much more people-centric. And I think that's where we are right now, taking steps in that direction. E-commerce portal ONDC, for example, is another one which allows small manufacturers. So SMEs can also get drawn in, smaller players can also get drawn in and, meet up with the final consumer at a more effective cost and higher efficiency. Apart from just being people-centric and being domestic-focused, I think the recent G20 also showed us that India could take a global role in this. We did speak about Global South. In the G20, there were about 8 countries where we signed MOUs with them to help them build their own, learn from the India's experience and try and attempt something in their own countries as well. So again, I think the crux of the infrastructure initiatives, all of that is very domestic focused. But I think that is where the main attention will be. I think because, you need to serve about 1.3, 1.4 billion worth of people. But again, I think this is also an opportunity for the country to take a more global view or a global role as well.
I think great example, Radhika. We've seen recently French president coming to India, and the highlight for him is to make the payment to a chai wala through UPI. And he was astonished and surprised the way it's happening in India. We can see today there's no need to carry a wallet or cash. Everything is done. But we have a risk also to take care with such a huge transaction. And as you rightly said, the kind of initiatives government has taken and the kind of focus they have, I think this will take fulfill the dream of Viksit Bharat by 2047. Now, let's move to the other part, which is on the capex cycle. Like from an economics perspective, what are your top 3 takeaways from the budget? Additionally, what do you think the private sector will participate in the capex cycle? I just want to hear from you.
Sure. I think like Rahul, had captured quite a bit of the math. So I think I'll just leave it at 3 main themes. And I think 3 main aspects where we saw quite a bit of confidence being expressed by the government, right? So the first one, I think, was the confidence in terms of growth. Many of the underlying assumptions that have been made is assumed on first, the growth will be in the 6 to 7% handle. Tax revenues, overall revenues are expected to do well. The tax buoyancy, for example, which basically means that how much is GDP growing by as a proportion of the tax revenues, has been kept over 1, which essentially again means that the structural improvements that have happened in the tax structure, tax system, which is essentially because of higher due diligence, because of digitalization of records and improved formalization. You've actually seen revenues structurally go up as well in the past 2-3 years, and of course it has been helped by generally corporates also doing better. So that is an inbuilt assumption that is in the math, which is that they're confident on the growth prospects, and I think that comes also from the money that's been put aside, a sizable amount of money that has been put aside for capex. The second confidence is about political stability and political continuity, and I think we did see those comments in the finance minister's speech as well, which essentially means that they didn't do any big ticket announcements, and I think that was in a way they do know that the economic tailwind is behind them. State elections went well. We had seen some changes in the opposition as well just earlier this month. So they're going in with the assumption and the conviction that they're going to come back after the April-May elections. And some of the private sector polls, early private sector polls that are coming out also seem to suggest the same. And the confidence on the third thing is about broader macro stability. I think the numbers that came out of the budget, again, in terms of borrowings, they did make sure it was something that was very easily digestible. And additionally, it's coming in a year when we're literally saying, hello to foreign investors in terms of debt investments, right? We've Indian debt or selected bonds are going to be included in a global index. Ahead of that, we already seen about $2 billion of worth money already come in this year, and we have just finished January. So in a year like that, they've actually gone on with a smaller borrowing program. Again, bodes well for macro stability. I think the one thing that perhaps needs a bit of work is the overall debt levels, which is still over 80% of GDP. But I think strict consolidation going forward will help that, and I think we are looking almost at a 1%, 1.5% reduction in just a matter of 2-3 years. So I think these 3 are the bigger, I would think, takeaways from confidence on growth, confidence on political stability, and confidence on broader macro stability from not only the fiscal perspective but also current account and currency and so on. I think the second question that you asked was on the private sector, and I think that's $1 million question, right? We have got the government employing a lot of finance money into capex. They've been doing that year after year. States have also been lent a hand, and I think they're also doing their bit. In fact, if you just put a few more components of what we consider as capex, is just not 11 trillion, it's actually 18 trillion. There are some other subcomponents you can add, and that overall number goes up. Now, the private sector has been drawn in. I think if you just talk about this budget, I think a couple of avenues where they've been drawn in. Number one, I think the borrowings have been kept down. That means private sector, it leaves a space for private sector's players to borrow. And the other one is, of course, the PLI schemes that has already been announced. There has been some enhancement on that front. And I think the third one is this big, I think details have yet to be announced, but there is this bigger proposal of putting about 1 lakh crores by way of 50-year interest-free loans, right? So
I was coming to that. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so let me just touch upon that then, preempt your question. That they would, again, details are not there yet. We don't know which kind of sunrise sectors they are looking at. What is it? What are the contours of this entire financing option? But if that comes to pass, R&D spending is less than 0.5, 0.6% of GDP at this point. So quite small when we compare global standards. But I think this is a step in the right direction that way, right? For want of financing, you don't want any sector to have credit facility issues. So I think these are some of the things, to my mind, which will be positive the private sector, particularly coming out of this budget.
Thanks, Radhika. I think before we move further, my last thing, though you've given a lot of perspective to think about, you've given the takeaways, confidence in terms of growth, political stability, and macro stability. But, if we want to hear a wish list from you, both from an Indian and foreign investor perspective, what that could be, and then happy to, why I'm putting this up, maybe, if our finance minister comes to know, on those wish list, maybe they fulfill in the main budget, which is coming in July 2024.
Certainly, I think I'm not a sectoral person, so perhaps I'll keep the thoughts a bit broad. I certainly think that the government has done, many pieces have come together, what I like to call push and pull, right? So basically, we have always had an interest in expanding our manufacturing footprint, and this has been often discussed about. But I think the big change that has happened again in the past 3-4 years is what's happening globally. There is a need for a new growth engine. There is a need for an economy to play a much bigger part in not only in terms of demand, but in terms of manufacturing as a manufacturing base as well. And I think in that way, India is very, very well positioned. And I think we're making good use of that. In terms of sector-specific things, of course, there are many sunrise, sectors. I mean, you can talk about electric vehicles, you can talk about startups, you can talk about green energy. These are some things where there were some piecemeal measures announced at the budget. But I think further, and you had seen, again, if you talk about some foreign names, Vietnam's VinFast, for example, had expressed an interest in investing. Conversations are going on with Tesla. We already have a very strong domestic ecosystem that's working on the EV space as well. So these are some of the things that where I think policies over time will be made friendlier, and you would see not only, for example, two-wheelers, EVs, but also four-wheeler EVs, the market share go up. So I would think, just to just round up, it's the ecosystem which is being developed over time, and I think if we keep up that way, we certainly can achieve the 3 to 5 to 7 trillion economy dream that we have for within this decade.
Fantastic. I think thanks. That sums up very well, and we are very much on time. Now let me move to the 4 panelists we have. I think Asim has got dropped up. Maybe once he's back, we'll come to him. But now we'll go to Mr. Chopra, who's an IRS, Joint Secretary, Tax Policy and Legislation, CBDT, Department of Revenue, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Thank you, sir, for taking the time out and coming to this panel and joining us today. I think we've heard from different people. Everyone is very positive. The government has been extremely proactive in seeking stakeholder inputs, taking corrective measures to bring clarity on tax and policy forms. As Riaz also said, and I think we would like to acknowledge the efforts taken by the government towards improving ease of compliances and ease of doing business in India. Though the wish list is never ending, which will come whatsoever. And I think for me, the main thing is the faceless regime for assessments and appeal is a historic move, which has been widely appreciated by the taxpayers we've seen over the time. With that, I would like to extend a warm welcome again for today's session. We hope to be enlightened with your insights on upcoming measures which government intends to take towards further reforms in tax policy and nationalization of compliances. You've heard the economists, you've heard Riaz, I think who's with 30 years of experience in tax regulatory matters, and I think this is his 30th budget. He's might have looked into, and as I said, wish lists are never ending. You've heard the economist Radhika, Rahul. There's a lot of expectations around nationalization of TDS, capital gains tax regime. So now we are happy to hear from you what government is thinking, how government is thinking, and maybe some clue on what we will expect from the July 2024 budget.
Thank you so much, Akhil. First issue which we start from is that this is an interim budget. Fundamentally, this was an interim budget. So as far as when a request was made to me for participation in the seminar, I could not at that point of time share even this information that we are not going to do anything, because even that information is a confidential information. So I could not share, I could not simply tell you that नहीं अभी कुछ नहीं कर रहे और हम अभी meeting का कोई फायदा नहीं है, इस discussion का फायदा नहीं है. But still, since it is a budget and we need to carry on the rates, the fundamental position in the finance bill of any interim budget is to carry on the rates for the earlier year which have been carried forward. That is the basic part of the budget. In addition to that, there was a lot of talk last year around TCS. When the TCS provisions came in the Finance Act 23, they were discussed a lot. There was a lot of critical analysis. I would not say criticism. There was a critical analysis of the provisions. Some pain points were pointed out. Then along with that, some credit card issues were there. DEA was notifying and denotifying something. So all these things actually resulted in a press release of June 23. So since that was a press release, it did not form the statute. The statute continued to under 2061G continued to remain the same as it was amended in the Finance Act 23. So the press release, the view of the government was required to be brought on the statute. That has been brought in. Nothing new has been done in 2061G apart from legislating the press release portion in the Act. That has been brought on the Act and it will be carried forward. Even the July to October thing has been incorporated by way of a specific proviso that provisions as on 1st April will continue to operate till 1st October. That was also by design that a vacant position should not remain between July and October, since the new provisions were coming in from 1st of October and the old legislation was coming in, 23 legislation was coming in from 1st of July. So that has also been taken care of. So that is with respect to the earlier provisions. Second, in the interim budget, we do not examine per se provision requests in detail. The requests and details which keep on coming to us as a part of the budget memorandums from all sectoral associations, ministries, we do not examine them in detail. But in this budget, there were some cut-off timelines which were absolutely critical and which were to expire before the July budget. So those 4 cut-off deadlines were in fact extended, and they were extended for 1 year. There was no detailed thought whether it should go beyond 1 year, whether it should be 2 years, or whether it should be 5 years. That detailed analysis has not gone into that, and therefore they were simply extended for 1 year. We'll look at them again in July and see what needs to be done and what needs to be done for what period of time. On the 115 BAB manufacturing thing, it was not a slip. It has been thought over and it has been thought about not extending it as of now. That is the position as it stands today. So you should not expect a government amendment on that and term it as a slip of any manner, but it is a thought about provision. And as of now, we are doing nothing, not extending this timeline. In July, we'll examine it again and see what needs to be done for manufacturing. If anything more has to be done for manufacturing specifically, certainly it will come. It's not that, because what we started from in 2014, other 15 budget, I was there as a director at that time also. The policy of the government was to make tax regime simpler. And the one thing which makes the policy complex is a number of carve-outs and deductions which are available on that. Anybody who's seen the Income Tax Act would actually agree on this, that there are so many deductions and exemptions which had built up over a period of 50 years. But some sector wants a carve-out for it, then a carve-out from a carve-out is made, goes on adding provisos and subsections. It makes Act complex. Mr. Jaitley in that budget clearly said that we will not extend the deduction regime. Chapter 6A, if you would have seen, hardly any extension has come in, any section has come in Chapter 6A. Only 180 LA related to IFSC has continued. Some minor section has also come, but broadly we have done away with deductions. Coupled with this, the rate of tax has come down from 30 to That is a huge thing. And that was for corporates. Last year, for other than corporates and firms, BAC has reduced the rate for personal income tax also. So we are moving away from that regime of deduction and exemptions and going into the regime of no deductions and exemption. So that basic thing which was raised by the first speaker, Riaz, was that this should not be a 1-year extension or a 2-year extension. First part of that answer is, at this point of time, we are not examining the periodicity or the period for which the extension is made. Second part, in principle, the policy of the department is not to encourage any deduction or exemption, rather go on a direct subsidy basis, direct funding basis, or to provide a lower rate of tax. That is how we see the policy developing at this point in time. So that will continue, that will be consistent. Seen along with this is that we are focusing on voluntary compliance. You just see our PIT collections have increased so much. They're still booming. Just see the personal income tax collections. But that is fundamentally due to the reason that my third-party information gathering as SFT has increased a lot in the last year. I'm taking information, each one of us is actually having the entire information which the department has is being shared with you. As a result, that voluntary, non-intrusive compliance, that is the focus of the government. Non-intrusive voluntary compliance is the basic cornerstone of government policy at this point of time. And that is the reason that my PIT collections are increasing automatically. For here, a comment also came that at the grassroots, maybe still there needs to be some more sensitization. As the government is liberal on policy, at the grassroots also, the policy, the cutting edge should be more liberal, accepted. But you see, my 99% of my assessees out of 8 crores are we accept whatever they tell us. So there is no audit, no scrutiny. So for 99.3% of the assessees, there is actually no grassroots interaction. So fundamentally, yes, there are problems at grassroots. There may be problems at the cutting edge, but they actually impact a very small segment of taxpayers. Yes, they should also not be. It should improve, and it is improving. The faceless regime was in fact focused on that only. We brought in the faceless regime and we focused on that. In fact, you see, the faceless regime also was developed over the period of 2-3 years. Earlier, the video hearing was not there. Then the video hearing was, if the assessee asked, it was made mandatory, both in appeals and as well as assessments. So that was a fundamental change which was brought in. So on that angle also, this government for that matter is extremely sensitive on any stakeholder suggestion. I've been in tax policy for more than 10 years now. I have not seen such a sensitivity towards stakeholder discussion or whatever suggestion comes from stakeholders. We are very, very sensitive.
Thanks, Mr. Chopra. Yeah, so Mr. Chopra, you touch upon a very good point on the new regime and the old regime.
Yeah.
And I'm happy that we've come to this part of discussion as well, because if I see the statistics, if I see the data, 85% of the people filing the personal tax returns still opt for old tax regime. Though we have seen a lot of rationalization of slab rates, a lot of benefits coming in the new tax regimes as well. But do you think that people still wants to follow that pattern of traditional making the investments to get benefits under the tax deductions and Chapter 6 for that matter and all, and that's why they still want to continue? Maybe the new tax regime is a shift for the new generation, but 85% is still people want to opt for the old tax regime.
Akhil, the change has come in financial year 23-24. The major change in the new regime, which is the new regime, 115 BSC subsection 1A, regime has come and kicked in only in 23-24. The returns will be filed by July 24, and that will be the proof of the pudding. Each one of us, you can, apart from persons who have taken huge housing loans, each one, I myself designed that whole process and tax benefit arising on an average investment of 2 lakhs made by a person in the old regime. Each one is benefiting. So you will see, I am absolutely confident about the returns to be filed in July, that we will see a major and massive shift towards the new regime in the returns filed in the next assessment year, that is assessment year 24.
25.
I'm sure about it. Yeah.
Points taken, sir. My next question is, as we've previously discussed with Riaz, we would like to understand your views on the decriminalization of provision under the income tax laws, where
Absolutely.
prosecutions can be initiated even for minor tedious offenses. I think Riaz spoke about it.
Absolutely.
We want to have your views as well here.
On the issue of decriminalization, yes, the government is focused toward decriminalization. Criminal offenses are serious offenses and they should be pursued only in minimal number of cases. That is absolutely taken. There is no running away from that fact. Taken with that, if you see, we are also focusing on our compounding guidelines, because compounding makes a prosecutable offense into a financial offense. Fundamentally, if you see, it is a financial, you pay up a compounding fees and the prosecution is concluded. In October 23, we made a massive change in compounding guidelines, and presently they are extremely liberal. So, but still the government is absolutely open to any suggestions, specific suggestions on these issues. You point out that these compounding guidelines still leave me out. These type of cases should also be there in compounding guidelines, which are presently not there. You absolutely, we are open to suggestions, because as far as I see, though the Act legislation appears to be very rigid on this, but the guidelines in cases where compounding prosecutions are actually initiated are very liberal and restrictive. After the initiation of prosecution also, the compounding guidelines enables any assessee to compound his offense and go back on the prosecution thing. So as far as the tax law goes, yes, the Act says these are prosecutable offenses. Whether it should be there or it should not be there, that is a matter of discussion. But on an executive side, we've actually limited that window substantially. That is my call.
Thank you, sir. I think you get a very good Riaz reacted to your reassuring, on this and other matters as well. He's given a thumbs up. I'll come back to you. I think Mr. Aseem Chawla has joined us back because I have a few questions to him and then trailing questions to you after hearing from Mr. Chawla. Mr. Chawla, thanks. Let me give a quick introduction about Mr. Chawla. He has 2 decades of focused experience in advising clients on a variety of domestic and international tax, business, legal matters. He is a member of Bar Council of India and fellow chartered accountant. As Mr. Chawla, you've seen, speakers have extensively covered the economic landscape and what lies ahead for India in the near future. Against that backdrop, I would like to drive the conversation towards tax policy and reforms. My first question too is around the BEPS Pillar 2 project. Considering the progress of BEPS Pillar 2 project, particularly in EU, MNCs have been expecting that the finance minister would provide some directional clarity with respect to changes in Indian tax laws. How do you view this, and how is this likely to impact foreign investments in India?
Thank you, and I think I can take the liberty of addressing you as Akhil.
Yeah, please, sir. Please,
yeah.
please. I'm way more junior.
No, not junior, senior. I think we were at a point in time, I had the good fortune of you working with us. Of course, we are extremely grateful on behalf of Chamber to have Mr. Chopra with us. Mr. Chopra's resume is such a treat to watch somebody who's masters in economics as well as a law graduate. And well, we've had this great legacy of the Honorable Joint Secretary's office, shouldering our yearly, and this is a yearly feature for us to do a post budget, and the legacy which he carries of Kamlesh ji, is a testament to his being so erudite and being almost a decade, in this particular field. We all understand that the views which he shares are his personal view, and please, to the audience, they should not be attributed in any way as views of the revenue. But the sheer fact that despite an interim budget, still he's taken time out. Hopefully, this is just a precursor to a sequel when we have a full budget, and then maybe Akhil, yourselves and team would have more questions. Having shepherded this annual feature of IACC for almost a decade, and getting the opportunity to present our pre-budget whenever we are sought by the North Block, which we do every year. I think we look forward to that opportunity this year also, as and when the chambers are requisitioned for a quick slot in-person meeting. But I was very impressed and delighted to see the resume of Mr. Chopra, and he's been very frank. Now, coming back to your question on Pillar 2, I think we need to go back a little in time to make it sound more contextual. We had the BEPS, and then we had the MLI 2016, and MLI comes out of the BEPS action plan, and then it graduates to Globi Pillar 1, Pillar 2. So MLI is sort of settling down in terms of those cover tax agreements, and where the provisions of treaty have to be read along with MLI, and the whole question of tax treaty entitlement largely on the principal purpose, Article 27 or 29. So that is still settling down. I think in about 2 years' time, you will have matters getting escalated where there is a case of a treaty abuse, because now the threshold is far more higher. Now, question of Pillar 2 is largely towards the digital and the global minimum tax, which you are talking about, and the fact that we were the first movers in terms of equalization levy. Now, at Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, we are very sensitive to the fact that US did, at a point in time, has issued a flag with regard to our equalization levy, and we had a very candid interaction with the US representatives who were part of the consulate and embassy here in terms of what's their stand. And we know that there is a pushback in the sense that till the time the world agrees, US will not initiate those punitive tariffs because of our equalization levy. So I think the developing countries are treading on this a little slowly. After a very long point in time, post the global financial crisis, and good things come out of bad, as they say, good comes out of bad. There has been a fair share of tax distribution, and the developing countries got onto the table of tax policy making. Once the UN is on board and we have a fair through the UN, and not that you're only looking at UN, the idea is to have a bipolar conversation with regard to global minimum tax, and with the countries having agreed and part of G20 also. And we had a meeting of finance ministers prior to G20 in one of the Middle East countries. I'm just forgetting the name, was it Qatar or somewhere, where almost all the finance ministers did agree on global minimum tax. I think US elections have always had a big impact in terms of how their outward international tax policy will look at. And now that we have elections in US, and the whole buy-in did not happen for the simple reason that US never got on board on MLI, and therefore everybody is waiting and watch in terms of they being a large capital exporter in terms of services, etc. So rather than sounding very theoretical on this, I think we need to protect our tax base. And at the same time, it's more incumbent on the countries where we have less, or where the tax rates are lower than 15, and that's why you get a Middle East, UAE agreeing on a taxing a natural person, and now you're looking at Saudi also pretty much introducing a tax. I think the buck stops more on those countries which are lower zero tax countries in terms of what happens to the whole issue of top-up tax, etc. And as far as we are concerned, I think at a point in time when it settles down, I think equalization levy should go, which is a good thing. In when I say good thing means not in a very binary thing, because I don't want to see at a personal level as a student of tax law or helping the community at large, where you find the whole issue of the vexed issue of what will take a priority, whether it's equalization levy or provisions of the Income Tax Act, because that matter is still in a way sub judice, but at the same time, one can argue to say that, well, it's the provisions of tax and then you have to go to equalization levy. So lest the industry is caught between the two, especially the industries which form part of SaaS, software as a service. We have a fairly robust provision under the Income Tax Act, and the guidance also came very recently with regard to domestic withholding tax obligations. So I think on Pillar 2, since we are chamber and we are pretty much the bridge between the taxpayer, the industry, both inward and outward, and the voice to the North Block. I think we need to take a cautious approach. Personally, there is no hurry in terms of being the first one to be off the block in terms of global implementation. So to speak, the multinational companies need to be, they are doing their part of awareness, and I'm sure, Akhil, at your end, you are one of the leading firms advising companies in terms of being prepared in terms of global implementation, Pillar 1, Pillar 2. I mean, sitting on ground here, I would feel that, there shouldn't be a lot of hurry on this. After a long time, countries have been able to claim their fair share of taxation. And the practices which were being viewed as aggressive in terms of tax treaty entitlement and benefit, and treaty benefits being taken for granted, so to speak, I think those days are numbered. We have many important questions of law which are pending adjudication before Supreme Court on many areas of international taxation. So I think it's better to have a maturity rather than imbibe the policy because it sounds fashionable, so to speak. I hope I've done justice to your question.
No, I think very well said. And before I'll come to the next question, I'll go to Mr. Chopra. Taking this question forward, that as we've seen many countries, rightly said, coming up with legislative measures around this. Sir, is there anything pipeline for the Indian government, and can we expect a legislation or some inputs on this coming from the government on the BEPS to Pillar 2 project?
Thank you, Asim, for the good words. I loved the stand taken by Asim and his analysis of the whole issue, that we need not rush into something, because especially it is a multilateral issue which is going on with reference to Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. It is not only me formulating a domestic legislation and putting it in place so as to substitute something which is going to happen at a later date. So it is best that we do not rush into something. Yes, it will take some time, but it is not that the department is not aware as what has to be done. The point of time at which we share something with the general public will come, and we are working on that. We'll see how it develops, but we are not rushing into something. We are absolutely something, then getting back something, then having a minimum tax and then going back on it without taking away equalization levy, not getting our rights in Pillar 1. They're all interlinked. So as of now, our position on equalization levy was this, that we are not changing as anything, either for the plus or for the minus for the time being. Let us see how the process develops both on Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. And when we are closer to maturing on Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, then we'll bring in the rules for a consultation with the stakeholders. Only after detailed consultation on the rules, we'll bring it on the statute and then proceed further. That is my view on it. We'll see how it develops. Foreign tax division is handling these directly, our discussions overseas. So they will come back to us, the tax policy division, that this needs to be done, and then we'll take a decision in the department as what is to be done, at what time it is to be shared, and how stakeholders' inputs have to be taken. Yes, the stakeholders need to be ready before they actually are faced with a policy guideline or a legislation. We are aware of that, and we've been following this. Even GAR was placed on public domain before actually legislating it. Even after coming on statute, it was deferred for a sufficiently long period so that people should read it positively and then absorb it. Similarly, what he said about MLI was absolutely relevant. MLI is now settling in, and synthesized texts have actually been placed where they should be in treaties. You see, if you go through the departmental website, open up a treaty, it actually incorporates the synthesized texts, which says that this is the agreed view of the competent authorities in most cases. So as far as certainty, because what we want, the government's policy, again from the policy perspective, is to have certainty in the mind of a foreign investor or a domestic investor or a businessman. That is what the focus of the government is. And we will always move towards this and not rush towards it. Thank you.
Point taken, sir. Very well said. Thanks for your inputs. So coming back to Mr. Chawla, my last question before we conclude this session for today. As India has emerged as the third large ecosystem for startups globally, we've seen that. What further initiatives can the government take for startups? Do you think what is done so far is adequate, or there's more to be done around that?
Look, what Mr. Chopra did allude to the fact that there are SOPs available for startups, which is part of the statute now. You have provisions, dealing with startups, and a little bit of angel tax relaxation is also there. Let's not forget the interministerial board and the guidelines do assist a startup in getting an accreditation. Now, what is required more is perhaps a fair bit of education, which has come from the fintech space to startups. There are, as I say, a cult of lawyers and consultants who are only dedicated to startups, and have specialized teams in assisting startups. What startups do need to recognize is the fact that, these guidelines are here to stay. Now, unless and until you feel that you can lobby around the guidelines and get it for more relaxed or liberal, I think if you're a startup and you are looking at employment generation and you qualify those guidelines in terms of intellectual property, etc., should you make an application? Yes. What can be desired is through Ministry of Commerce and Industry is the fact that if the time period of the application approval or dispensation could be a little more quicker and faster. And I can tell you, frankly, there are a lot of startups who are in the courts now litigating their applications, which is not expecting more in terms of legislative dispensation from Income Tax Act. That's already there in place. Of course, they'll mange more, and you can sky is the limit. When you look for exemption and deduction. I think it's fairly balanced. Yes, the Commerce Ministry and Industry can look up to some more liberalized way of looking at it. The IMB can look at it in a more industry very quickly in startup industry. Few things are fashionable, few things are not fashionable. So we can't have tax policy. We can't have policies which are running behind startups. You can't wag the tail, put the cart before the horse, in a cliche manner. If you're a startup, get a registration, get a timely registration. You know what the tax SOPs and incentives are. You have a new set of guidelines in terms of valuations also. Now there are few more recognized methods. I had the opportunity of addressing the valuation Congress about a few about a month ago in Mumbai, and I duly acknowledge that the amount of technology which goes into the valuation bit and all that sophistication has been brought into the income tax rules, recognizing those additional methods of valuation, which was a far cry of startups. So, I mean, as I said, the list is endless, and the good part of startups is that they keep us honest, whether it's the policy formula situation all around. So that's my 2 bits on startups.
Thanks, Mr. Chawla. I think it's a revalidation of the fact that whatever government has done so far for the startup is more than enough. And obviously, as you rightly said, "Ye dil mange more." There's a never-ending wish list, but it's a give and take relationship we have. And before we conclude to this session, Mr. Chopra, any concluding remarks from your side, and any clues for a common man to see in the full budget? Obviously, when we invite you, you can't tell us that there's nothing happening in interim budget, but still, July 2024 is a bit far. If we see the same government coming in, any key takeaways from your side before we conclude to this session?
One thing is clear. Whenever I interact with any association, any sector, I always tell them, just don't keep anything to you. Give us as much as you can so that we can examine everything. So unless it comes to us, it stays with you only. I've done this with the departmental officers also. We've been going to field also. We've been going to associations also. In North Block also, we meet about 100 associations. Everywhere, we always tell them, just give us whatever you want. Because that is, unless you give us what you want, we cannot process it. Asim made one statement that the views here are my own views. Okay. But the second part of it, whatever I'm hearing from you is I'm hearing on behalf of the government. So whatever you see goes to the government, goes to the policy input. Whatever you speak, whatever you send to us, do send to us before the budget, at least a month before it. Just don't get late, because anything which has to come to us needs to be processed, needs to be put up to the finance minister, and a whole lot of discussion, analysis has to go in that provision. So my request is that when requesting anything, do give us time to actually analyze it and then process it further. So you should keep your deadline for 15th of May if you want to give us anything for the July budget. We'll process it certainly. And a meeting, when you come to the North Block to meet, be clear and focused on these are the primary things you require. You can have 100 suggestions. A CII request for 500 pages comes to us, but unless they focus on 5 or 6 items which are required to be done, it is not possible for us to actually legislate them. So just keep 5 critical points that this, on behalf of the chamber, these are our 5 critical points which we absolutely require. Maybe we are able to do 2, 3 out of them. That is a sufficient 60% hit rate. But please come to us, and we are open to discussion, explanation on the rules. Also 11 UA, it was placed in public domain. I myself discussed on a personal level also with so many people. Aap mujhe batao kya chahiye kya. So that is why we could actually make them which is more palatable, which a provision was brought in. At the time it was brought in, a huge hue and cry was there, but it settled properly, and it is a fair provision. So we are always focusing on fairer provisions with stakeholder consultation. But the consultation should come to us. Your prioritization should be clear. That is my answer.
Sir, thank you very much. In fact, we've put together something, and I'll request Ms. Sadhana, part of Secretariat, to see that it's presented to your good offices in time.
Sure.
So, and then basis that, sir, we've put together something. We'll present it to your good offices as soon as we can, because it's ready. I mean, I think we can send it sooner than what we say. And please have a look at it. And sir, we also wanted to take this opportunity, and I don't want to steal the thunder from Akhil, in the sense that post budget, sir, please do. We will seek and reach out to you for a post budget session, and hopefully we could do it in person this time, and probably seek your time much in advance. Akhil, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. No, sir, that was a request which I was about to make, not to Mr. Chopra, but to all the panelists
Certainly.
to reconvene, because I've noted down the entire list of wish list and perspective coming from economists, Riaz, Rao, Radhika, yourself, Mr. Chawla, and Mr. Chopra, and I want this panel to reconvene and take this discussion further. So thanks for your insightful discussion and inputs. Looking forward to the full budget in July 24, and getting this panel again to take this discussion further. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.